On everybody, I just wanted to come on here quick and do an overview of the Cold War because we didn't get the chance to do it in class. So I'm going to go through three main points. We'll start with the causes, context, hit on some of the major moments, and then detail the end of the Cold War, some of the reasons behind it. So I tried to just keep it succinct and just hit on all the key points that do often come up on the Regents. But first and foremost, you have to understand this split right here between the United States and the Soviet Union. This is really going to form the basis of the Cold War because of their differing ideologies, meaning their worldviews on what they thought countries how they should govern themselves, how they should run their economies, and what they felt was best for the world long term. So we on the United States side, we have the capitalist democratic approach, and on the Soviet Union side, in red here, we have the communist and typically a little bit more authoritarian, which means less democratic, less voice to the people. The colors is also intentional as well. When you do see the Soviet Union, they're often associated with the color of red. So that could possibly help you in like a political cartoon or something like that. We do start here with the Iron Curtain speech. This is really going to spark the whole idea of this Cold War and the tensions between the two sides of the world. This is given by Churchill. He's the Prime Minister for the UK during World War II. So he definitely serves as a Western voice, Western part of the world. So you can connect that with the United States. And he basically calls out the Soviet Union for what he sees as sort of suspicious influence on Eastern Europe. And we'll go back to that map here, and I'll hover right over Eastern Europe here, and we see these states are siding with the Soviet Union. They're developing these communist governments. The Soviet Union claims the people wanted it. Churchill doesn't think so. He thinks it's Soviet influence from Moscow, which is the capital of the Soviet Union. And at this point in time, that would be the Soviet Union under Stalin. So you might see it depicted in cartoons here. Remember, it is not an actual curtain. There's no actual wall. It is not the same thing as the Berlin Wall either. This is simply a metaphoric curtain of the dividing line between the communist side and the capitalist side. One of the key policies that develops in the wake of this from the United States is containment. Containment is something you have to know. It comes up a lot, and it is pretty straightforward. If you think of, you're trying to contain something, you're trying to stop it. In this case, the United States, all they're trying to do is stop the spread of communism. So you can see Uncle Sam here reaching over, trying to push back against the Soviet Union, where the Soviet bear, that sort of symbol of the Russians, the bear definitely serves as a symbol here, trying to spread communism. And so one of the things that we see is the American president, Harry Truman, he issues this as his doctrine, that we're going to stop the spread of communism, the Truman Doctrine, we're going to contain it. And really what they're going to do is just provide money and resources to anybody that is going to stick on the United States side, of the capitalist democratic side. Anyone that turns communist will be viewed as an adversary or a threat. And they will not receive the funding, they will not receive any sort of support. One of the places that we see this really boil up in terms of tension is in Germany. Germany, after World War II, is being divided into different zones. What's interesting about it, though, is that the eastern part of Germany, the Soviet zone, of course, as we've established, is now going to go to a communist direction, as they have that influence from the Soviet Union, from Moscow. But within Eastern Germany, we see the city of Berlin. And Berlin is also going to be split into 4 zones. But it's within the eastern part of Germany. So it's within this communist zone that they're supposed to also, the West is also supposed to get control of parts of the city. So it's kind of an interesting situation because Stalin, the communists, the Soviets, they're going to want to get total control. Why do we have to give up a little bit of slice of Berlin in our eastern part of Germany that we're supposed to control? So there's this whole blockade. He tries to shut down any resources from the West. This forces the West to then send these airplanes in. There's this whole Berlin airlift moment where they, for months on end, drop supplies literally out of planes onto the ground, the city below. What we saw in class throughout the year is that the conditions between East Berlin and West Berlin will differ substantially because of the differing government types. This is going to lead to a lot of people fleeing East Berlin as the conditions, the life conditions, the amount of money they make, the amount of opportunity they have to succeed is much lower, so a lot of them will try to flee. This will cause what eventually develops in the Berlin Wall, where there is a wall placed around all of Western Berlin to prevent anybody from the east from fleeing. Because once you got into the west here, you could get on a plane ride and you could get out of the country and you would be able to flee from communist control. While all this is happening, one of the key reasons why the Cold War is what it is, a war that never turns into a direct conflict, is because of nuclear weapons. And at this time, we see nuclear weapons spreading throughout the globe. Another more fancy word for spread is proliferation. We sort of see this arms race develop, where there's this threat constantly that the United States could use a nuclear weapon, the Soviet Union could use a nuclear weapon now, and so it's like the world is at a standstill. Will they choose to use it? Will it go off? If they do, it seemed as though the world as we knew it would be over, because once these bombs started going off, everything would be destroyed. And so you will often see questions about nuclear proliferation, the spread of nuclear weapons, the arms race. They often do it in cartoons like these. And the main theme is always sort of the same, that there was an arms race and that it created a lot of tension in the world. It put the world in a compromised position and eventually would have led to what we see, treaties getting signed, where we actually do find both the USA and the Soviet Union eventually agree to reduce the amount of nuclear weapons they have. With that, though, doesn't mean that the Cold War didn't have conflicts. It definitely did have hot conflicts, even if they weren't directly fought between the Soviet Union and the United States. It doesn't mean people weren't fighting on battlefields and losing their lives, and often these conflicts were being fueled and funded by either the United States or the Soviet Union. So we call these proxy conflicts because these different countries, whether it be Turkey, Iran, you see the Congo, Angola, Cuba, all these different places throughout the world, were being used as proxies of the United States and of the Soviet Union. And all that really means is they were countries that were often gaining independence or trying to create a new path forward, a new government. And the United States wanted them to be capitalist, wanted them to be Western. The Soviet Union wanted them to be communist, wanted them to be Eastern. So they would try their best to gain favor in these countries, and this often spelled out into conflicts. The most common ones they ask about are Cuba, Cuban Missile Crisis, Soviet missiles discovered in Cuba, close proximity to the United States, major moment in world history. Were they going to go off? Was this going to be the end of the world? It does get resolved through diplomacy, through conversation. They ask about Vietnam, as we've seen with Ho Chi Minh. Korea, they could. I haven't seen that frequently. Afghanistan, they've asked about, with the Soviet Union trying to push into Afghanistan, causing a lot of problems for them. But other than that, it's not a frequent topic, but it could come up. Détente is another vocabulary word. All it really means in French is relaxation of tensions. So we see here the leaders of the Soviet Union and the United States coming together and shaking hands with one another, pictured here sharing a drink, showing that the Cold War tensions were easing. It was very costly, it was very expensive, and so it was looking like maybe the Cold War was going to be over. However, it does fuel up again, and it really doesn't end until Gorbachev, and he's someone I would know, the premier for the Soviet Union, and the policies associated with him. Glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, restructuring. Glasnost is your openness in everything, really. Free speech, freedom of the press, going against what was the traditional Soviet way of governing. This is going to expose a lot of the history of the Soviet Union, the history of abuses, the history of silencing their people, which definitely won't help them in this Cold War battle of who's got the better image globally. And then perestroika is going to try to add in some market reforms in his economy, in the Soviet economy, but it's going to kind of happen too quickly, which will create a sort of shock and damage a lot of the economies in the Soviet Union and the different states they're allied with, which will lead to the eventual downfall. Even with good intentions, trying to make change for the better, all of these Soviet states that were in union are going to begin pushing towards independence, towards breaking away. You'll often see your hammer and sickle here pictured in a form of disarray. It's being shattered, symbolizing the Soviet Union is no more. Another major event kind of coinciding with this end of the Cold War, collapse of the Soviet Union, is also the collapse of the Berlin Wall. We see the East and West Berliners are able to interact with one another once more. The wall comes down in this spirit of democracy and trying to open up glasnost, freedom, and the guards eventually do have to give in. There's a little bit of miscommunication in how this all unfolds, but either way, it symbolizes the end of the Cold War. So we could do a couple practice questions real quick. Here we go. Which generalization about the Cold War is best supported by the headlines? Again, if I see Cold War in the question, in my head I'm going to just start thinking, what do I know about the Cold War? Causes, events, effects, anything like that, and try to match best. And of course, look at the headlines as well. They mentioned Cuba, Berlin blockade. So all these tense moments is basically what they're highlighting. So I'm looking for anything about tension between the United States and Soviet Union. Prevented outbreaks of violence. Certainly didn't prevent outbreaks, so we can eliminate that. We just talked about there was moments where this boiled up. Led to direct military conflict. No, never happens during the Cold War. That's why it's called the Cold War. It impacted various countries and regions throughout the world. Cuba, Berlin and Germany, Czechoslovakia, all different regions, countries throughout the world. This looks like the right answer. You can look at the fourth one, a required intervention by the United Nations. There's nothing from this headline that really indicates that. You can cross that out. It's choice 3. NATO and the Warsaw Pact, 2 key alliances in the Cold War. States organized together to support each other's side. NATO, we have the West. We have Western Europe, the United States, banding together to prevent any sort of Soviet expansion. And then the Warsaw Pact was the Soviets' version of this, their military alliance to prevent any more Western expansion into the Soviet Union. So which situation led to the creation? That's a cause question, so we're looking for anything that would have caused this to happen. Which, in this case, just these 2 alliances, I'm looking for anything related to rising tensions, the Cold War, something like that. Go through them. Successful launching of Sputnik by the Soviet Union. That is the first man in space, but often when they give you a very specific event, it's not going to be the right answer for something like this. It's not going to have that big of an impact to where it's going to lead to these major alliances. So I'm looking for something a little bit more general. The rejection of military-industrial complex by the West really doesn't have anything to do with the Soviet Union. If anything, they don't reject it. They keep building nuclear weapons, so that's out. Nikita Khrushchev's goal to expand the Soviet economy. Khrushchev is in power during the Warsaw Pact in the Soviet Union, but this is a military alliance, not an economic one, so that's out. Tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States. Bingo, that's the correct answer. Which claim is best supported by the map? In this case, I would take each of these statements and compare it to everything you see on the map. If I can prove any of part of this statement wrong, it cannot be the correct answer. The Soviet Union bordered all Warsaw Pact nations. Look at the key, compare to what we see here. Soviet Union, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria. Already I'm seeing the Soviet Union doesn't border all of these states. Like we see depicted here, it doesn't border. If we look into Hungary, it looks like it's cut off there. You can kind of tell. Romania, it borders. Bulgaria, though, it doesn't look as though it borders it. We can take that out. NATO membership was restricted to European countries. No, I mean, we see the United States and Canada. We can cross that out. all European countries belong to either NATO or the Warsaw Pact. We can disprove that. Some of these countries here are not aligned with either. NATO and Warsaw Pact nations shared some boundaries. Yeah, I mean, we see them right here. We see them connected. They're sharing the boundaries. We can prove that. That's going to be the correct answer. Bombs, arm wrestling, I'm thinking it, you should be thinking it. Nuclear arms race, something related to the arms race, something related to maybe one of the conflicts involving nuclear tensions. Which statement best describes the cartoonist's purpose in creating this cartoon? Remember, they're always trying to critique some sort of political policy. So I'm looking for something that is trying to draw attention, try and critique, build support for the Soviet Union's desire to spread communism. Doesn't look like anything related to that here. I'm taking that out. To draw attention to United Nations peacekeeping efforts, maybe, but let's keep going to see if we can find something a little bit better. To highlight the dangers of mutually assured destruction. That's a key phrase here. Mutually assured destruction is the idea that if one country uses the nuclear weapons, then the other country will use it as well, and everybody is destroyed. So as soon as I see this phrase, I know it connects with nuclear weapons, and so I'm already liking it. I think this is going to be the right answer, but I'll look at the last one. To assess the way proxy wars were fought. Again, it's connected to the Cold War, but it's not really about proxy wars. It's more so about just nuclear arms race tension. And again, the cartoonist, he's trying to critique, he's trying to bring awareness to a problem. The best answer there is choice 3. Highlighting the dangers, that's the key phrase. Which action was the direct result of the situation depicted in this cartoon? Looking for anything maybe related to reducing nuclear weapons, trying to ease nuclear tensions, using appeasement strategies. Nope, that's World War II, that's with Hitler. Abolishing international alliances. Nope, they're going to only grow in the wake of the Cold War. Implementing glasnost. I know that comes after it. Does it really connect here? Establishing nuclear arms control talks. That directly connects. Nuclear arms is in the question, in the answer choice. That's going to be the correct answer. Boom. Last couple here. I see the Berlin Wall. I see people taking it down. These photographs could be used when studying the end of which conflict? Cold War, immediate. That should be a gimme question as soon as you see the Berlin Wall connecting to that. What was the result of these actions shown in the photographs? Well, the Cold War's ending, so I'm looking for anything about a reduction in tensions. Creation of one-party political system. No. The rise of fascist dictators. Nope, that's before World War II. An easing of tensions. Yup, there you go. Formation of NATO. Nope, we saw that happens earlier on in the beginning of the Cold War. All right, last couple here. Cartoon. Remember, it's always trying to critique. It's always ironic. Don't take it literally. What event is being depicted in the cartoon? I see a casket, communism. I see what looks like Stalin and Lenin in the clouds. They got the hammer and sickle. They're sort of looking down after dying, seeing communism being taken away. So again, this kind of connects to the end of the Cold War, the end of the Soviet Union. Right here is Gorbachev. He's walking away as well. So I'm looking for anything related to the end of the Cold War, the end of the Soviet Union. And there we go. Choice 3, the collapse of the Soviet Union. Which policy most directly contributed to this? So that's which policy caused it. I'm looking for anything about Gorbachev, right? He's the key figure when it comes to the end of the Soviet Union. Can't be Lenin, can't be Stalin, can't be Deng. It is Gorbachev's policy of glasnost, and that is the correct answer. All right, I would go through this again. You should try and explain the Cold War, try to teach it, get to the point where you could explain the different concepts, the key terms. That would be my advice to you. Have a good night.